The lesson outcome for this video is I can solve a quadratic equation by factoring using the zero product property. So first, we are going to talk about this idea of a zero product property. All right, so let's just think about this for a second. What do I get when I multiply 3 times 0? Well, the answer is 0, because when we multiply by 0, we get 0. So then my next question is, what do I have to multiply 5 by if I get 0? 5 times what number gives me 0? Well, the only answer there is, again, 0. Because 5 times 1 is 5, and 5 times negative 1 is negative 5, and 5 times negative 5 is negative 25. There's only one thing we can multiply 5 by to get 0, and that answer is 0. Well, what we're looking at right here is we are looking at the zero product property. The zero product property says that if two things are being multiplied, let's say A and B, okay, and we know we get the answer of 0, well, it means that either A has to equal 0, or it means that B has to equal 0. There's no other way around it. Because if two items are being multiplied and the answer is 0, just like we looked at up here, if 5 is being multiplied by something and we get 0, we know that thing has to be 0 right there. So again, the zero product property in a nutshell says if we know two things, two factors, are being multiplied and the answer is 0, then we know that either the first factor equals 0 or the second factor has to equal 0. Let's see why this is helpful. So these examples are why the zero product property is helpful. If you look at this first problem right here, this is an equation. All right, there's an equal sign right here. To solve an equation means to find out what the value of the variable must be in order to get the answer on the other side. Well, let's think for a minute. What number times what number equals 0? Well, there's a lot of options. As long as one of the numbers is a 0, we're going to get 0. So what if I told you, and this is not the answer, but let's say I told you x equals 1. Would this be a true equation? We'd get 1 plus 3, which is 4, times, and we put a 1 in here, 1 plus 4 is 5. So we have 4 times 5, and 4 times 5 is 20, not 0. So we know that is not our answer, okay? So the question is, though, how do we find our answer? Well, let me get rid of this here. Hold on one sec. Okay, so how do we find our answer? Well, we use this thing called the zero product property that I discussed on the previous page. If I am multiplying, which I am, this is multiplication, if I'm multiplying two things times each other and I get the answer of 0, that means either this whole factor is 0 or this whole factor is 0. So what we can do here is we can simply break this equation down into, we know that either x plus 3 has to equal 0, or we know the other factor, x plus 4, has to equal 0. See what I did there? I just took this first factor and set it equal to 0, and I took the second factor and I set it equal to 0. And now we have these little quick equations to solve. Now remember, solving equations, if x right here has 3 being added to it, we need to get x alone by subtracting 3. And if we subtract 3 from one side of the equal sign, we have to subtract it from the other side of the equal sign. All right, so positive 3 minus 3 is 0. And now we get x equals 0 minus 3, which is negative 3. Or we need to subtract 4 to get x alone here. And when we do that, these cancel, and we're left with x equals 0 minus 4, which is negative 4. So we've now found our answers, and yes, there's more than one. We found our answers to this equation right here. either x is negative 3 in this equation to make it true, or x equals negative 4 in this equation to make it true. Let's see why. What if I put a negative 3 in for x? What do we get if we have negative 3 plus 3? Well, negative 3 plus 3 would become 0. So this would be 0. And it doesn't even matter what this is, because 0 times anything will be 0. So that would be true. Now what if we put negative 4 in to this equation? Well, negative 4 right here would be negative 4 plus 3, which is negative 1, times, if we put a negative 4 in here, negative 4 plus 4, well, negative 4 plus positive 4 becomes 0. So even though we knew this was negative 1, we now have negative 1 times 0, which will be 0. So these two answers both work to make this equation true. So let's try this second one on the right here. Okay, so this time we have x times x minus 5. We're multiplying two factors, and we're going to get 0. So our job is to find out what the values of x can be, and we get 0 when we multiply them. So we're going to do the same process using the zero product property, which tells us that if two things are being multiplied together, and again I'm looking at the x and the x minus 5, the whole factor, if I multiply these two things and I get 0, that means either this is 0 or this is 0. So we're going to write those down. Either x equals 0 or x minus 5 equals 0. Well, the first one's actually solved already. X equals 0 is one of our solutions. But the other side, x minus 5 equals 0, we need to add 5 to get x alone, and we need to add 5 to both sides of the equal sign. Add 5, whoops, to both sides. These will cancel, negative 5 and positive 5, so we get x equals 0 plus 5, which is 5. And now we have, again, two solutions, x equals 0 or x equals 5 to make this equation true. And we're going to check this one again just to make sure you understand what we're getting when we're done. X equals 0. Does that make this equation true? Well, if I put a 0 right here, in fact, why don't I just go ahead and put that in, I'll put it in green here. If I put a 0 in for x, and then I multiplied it by, and I put a 0 in for this x, I get 0 times 0 minus 5. Well, 0 minus 5 is negative 5, but what's 0 times negative 5? Well, 0 times anything is 0. So this makes the equation true. Now let's try 5. If I put 5 in for x, and I put 5 in for the other x, okay, again, this 5 I put in for this x right here, and this 5 I put in for this x right here. Well, what's 5 minus 5? 0. What's 5 times 0? 0. So both of these answers for x gives us a correct equation, which means they're both solutions to the equation. Okay, so what I'd like you to do right now is pause the video and try these two on your own, and then restart the video and check to see how you did on these. Okay, so what you should have done is said, in order for these two things to multiply to give me 0, one of them must be 0. So we are going to set x minus 6 equal to 0, and we're going to set x plus 1 equal to 0. To solve this one, I'm going to add 6 to both sides, and I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides on this one. Just kind of doing the work at the same time. Those cancel. X equals 0 plus 6, which is 6. And these cancel, and x equals 0 minus 1, which is negative 1. So, x equals 6, or x equals negative 1. In the other one, what you should have done is you should have set x equal to 0, or x minus 9 equal to 0. Or set them both equal, actually. The first one is already solved. X equals 0 is one of our options, and yes, the variable can equal 0. In the other one, we're going to add 9. And we get x equals 9. So again, our two solutions, whoa, sorry about that, are x equals 0 or x equals 9, and both of those will make the equation true. Okay, so now, why are we learning how to solve an equation by using the zero product property? Well, because what happens next is that we're going to connect what we were just doing on the previous page to a quadratic situation. So what we need to do here is we need to see that we have a quadratic equation or quadratic expression set equal to 0. If I can factor this into my two sets of parentheses and set it equal to 0, I will use the zero product property that we learned on the previous screen to solve this. So in order to do that, the first thing we're going to do is factor x squared minus 7x minus 8. To do that, we are going to start by writing our c value over here. Did you notice that a is 1? So when a equals 1, that's always nice because it's a quicker way of factoring. Negative 8 is 1 times 8, but one of them needs to be negative, or 2 times 4, and one of them needs to be negative. In order to get negative 7, we're going to use the negative 1 and the 8, but we're going to need to switch the sign from the negative at the 1 to the negative at the 8. These multiply to get negative 8, and they add up to negative 7, which means that will work for us. So we're going to put our two sets of parentheses down. We're going to set that equal to 0. We're going to keep that equal 0 thing. And we're going to put an x here and an x here, a plus 1 and a minus 8. Notice now, right here, this is exactly what we worked on the previous screen. If two things are being multiplied, two factors are being multiplied and give you 0, one of them needs to be equal to 0. So I'm going to set x plus 1 equal to 0, and I'm going to set x minus 8 equal to 0. Okay, and we're going to solve these. I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides of my equal sign. Those will cancel, and we have x equals negative 1. And over here, we're going to add 8 to both sides. We have to do the opposite to get rid of the negative 8. And x equals 8. So x equals negative 1 or x equals 8. Both of those answers will make this equation true. Okay, go ahead, factor this second equation on the right, and then use the zero product property to solve. I will check your answer in class the next time we meet.